Hello and welcome to another short drawing lesson. Bit different this week. Somebody asked if I could demonstrate a perspective sketch of this Ford Consul Capri, and that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to describe what's going through my head as I do the drawing, but a word of warning, some of the things I mentioned just in a sentence are things that are quite technical and need a bit more explaining. So if you ever dig through my channel, you'll find lots of other films that explain some of these bits in more depth rather than I can do here in the 6 minutes. But the first thing I did before I did the 3D view was a little side view and a few more very rough studies just to try and get clear in my head what shape this thing was. The idea is to get so familiar with the form as a 3D object that you can then draw this from any angle without having to slavishly copy your reference photo. That's the idea. Anyway, so that's it. On with the sketch. Let's see how it went. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a box. And you'll see a lot of car drawing tutorials teaching you how to draw a box and then draw a car inside a box. And that can work really well, but it's not so good for curvy cars. So luckily this Ford Consul Capri is quite boxy, so it does sort of serve the purpose well here. But I'm still making sure that this is a box with a difference. It's got a slightly curving top surface, slightly curving sides, and a slightly curving front. And it's worth thinking about those from the outset rather than drawing a box and then trying to force it to be a different shape later on. This works better, I think. So the useful thing that a box does give you is a perspective grid. So that first rectangle with its lines tapering off to an imaginary vanishing point, that's sort of going to be burnt into my mind. And every time I add anything to this sketch, I'm going to be trying to make sure that it fits in with that perspective grid, that first rectangle I drew, so that hopefully at the end everything will feel coherent and tie together nicely. I also dropped in the center line there, which is an important sort of guide for keeping things symmetrical and thinking about 3D space. Notice it's pushed quite far back, and that helps the feeling of depth. So now I'm dropping in the shut lines for the doors. They're again a good way to describe a surface of a shape. And they also lead me to where the glass house should be and where the pillars are for the windscreen. So the windscreen, I think I found perhaps the trickiest part of this sketch. I think I expected it to be a bit more curvy than it was, and it was quite rectangular. I also drew it a bit too low, so I'll change that. So here, sort of put the roof on and realised, it's a bit flat. And so now I've raised the pillar slightly, raised the top edge of the windscreen, raised the roof. And that's an important thing. At this stage, you want to be drawing very, very lightly because this is the problem-solving part of the sketch, where you're just tentatively dropping things in and seeing if they're right or not. Later on, we can firm things up and try and make the drawing look beautiful. But at this stage, it's really just sort of dropping things as lightly as possible just to see if they feel right or not before carrying on to the next bit. The shadow on the floor is another useful rectangle you can drop in, which will give a feeling of perspective. It's another thing that reinforces that perspective grid. And it stops your car feeling like it's floating in space as well. It's definitely a good idea to have a shadow. So now I'm working my way around, dropping in things like the headlights. Notice the wheels and the headlights both have axis lines in that show me how much to tilt the ellipses by so that they're angled correctly. There are a few more small details like these side lights that need to go in. I'm looking at my reference pictures and thinking, what have I missed? Like the smaller pillars in the side screens. Although I have got reference pictures, I'm not sticking slavishly to exactly the same angle. I'm trying to draw the angle that I wanted. It's a bit higher than my reference picture. And that's kind of the purpose of this exercise, is to get familiar with the 3D shape so that you can eventually, after you've done a few, draw your object from any angle you like. You don't have to stick slavishly to your reference anymore, which is a good place to be. So now I'm just firming up some of these key details, and now I'm finally starting to add some darker marks. So these very dark shadows on the undersides of things like the headlight surrounds and the grille, they work a bit like the highlights in a colour image. When you drop those little white crisp highlights on, and it makes the image pop. So these work in the same kind of way. But the important thing is not to get carried away and put them everywhere, because then your drawing can look messy and disjointed, and you lose the impact of the few that you do have. So the aim at the end of this sketch is to have something that has a nice mix of very lightly drawn sketchy lines and some firmer, darker, richer shadows as well. A nice balance between the two, because that will make for an interesting drawing. If you were to put a heavy outline around everything, all the same thickness, then you could easily kill your sketch and it would feel kind of lifeless. So I'm firming up some of the important sort of design features, like the fin, but I probably overdid that one slightly. And if I did this again, I'd probably just do it a few strokes less on those fins, but never mind, they're there now. And they are an important part of the design. A few more little things that I've missed, like the number plate, windscreen wipers. And it's a good idea when you're drawing your windows and things to think carefully about the shape of the car that you can see through it, because that all leads towards making your car feel more three-dimensional, making sure that the sill on the far side of the car corresponds to the rest of your bodywork and makes it feel three-dimensional. So I'm just firming up that side window shape. That nice swooping curve on the side window, that seems like it made it through to the final Capris that I remember from my childhood. Whereas the rest of the car really got kind of thrown away. Those fins were very much a 50s styling thing, weren't they? So I'm just dropping in things like the bottom edge of the doors, a bit of shadow around where the wheel would be, and the sketch is pretty much finished now. Like I say, there are a few mistakes here and there, a few things I do differently, but it's just a quick study. It took 6 minutes, and it was the purpose of it was to get clear in my mind how this object was put together. And now I could scan this in, add some colour, correct the bits that aren't quite right, and or maybe just start another one. I hope you found that useful and interesting. And like I say, a lot of these techniques and things that I did here are covered in much more detail in the other films on my channel, so do have a look for those. Otherwise, like and subscribe. Have a great week, and tune in for another one soon.